payback, because it really isn't a good way to make decisions, yet that's the one we typically look at. You always hear people say, oh, payback's 3 years, I'll buy it. Or payback's 5 years, I'll buy it. No, it's not the best way. So you should use, or at least consider, a couple of others: internal rate of return and net present value, which I'll explain in a minute. So payback period refers to the amount of time it takes to return on investment to repay the sum of the original investment. So if I paid $1,000 for something, and it takes, in this case, 2 years to get my money back, we'd say it's a 2-year payback, right? And the shorter the payback, that typically means that's the better investment. That's the kind of thinking. So if this one, I get my money back in 2 years, and another investment, it takes 3 years to get my money back, people would say, well, let's take the one with the shorter payback. Right? It's hard to compare them, right? It's hard to compare them. Net present value, however, uses what's called the time value of money. And it looks at both your inputs and your outputs. So if I spend $500 today, the money's going to come back over the next 10 years. How much is that money going to come back, and how much is it worth? Right? Does that make sense? So with net present value, it's the highest value decision is the best one for you. So which one has the greatest value in dollars? When you say, here's my costs, here's my benefits, what's the total benefit? Net present value.
Give me an example.
I'll give you one in a minute. How's that? Trust me on that. We're going to get to that. Okay. So I just need, for this little exercise, does anybody have change for 20?
Remember, we know where you live.
You bet.
Somebody already asked me that.
Yeah, a bunch of twos in the car.
You got something?
Just at 15.
Let's go snuff for Ronn.
I got some coins.
That's okay. It's just a, so nobody hesitate to give me $20, 2 tens right now from my 20, right? Why is that?
Equal value.
Equal value. What if I said, okay, what do you give me for this 20 if I give it to you a year from now? I promise I'll give it to you a year from now. This 20, what would you give me now? Well, you feel a little differently about it, don't you? And there's two parts to that. So one part is there's a cost of money. You're paying interest on your money, and although interest is pretty low right now, it's still a factor. The other part is, well, where the hell's Ron going to be a year from now? I might not get my money. Right? So there's a risk factor involved as well, right? So there's two things involved there. If I said, how much will you give me now if I'll give you this 20 in 10 years? Right? So you see, the risk gets bigger, and the interest in the meantime gets bigger. You may give me $9 today, or $19 today for $20 a year from now, if you, like these guys know where I live, so they don't have any risk, it's just insurance. But when you go 10 years out, you might say, right, you know? So the time value of money takes that into consideration. So when we're looking at a cost benefit that's coming back tomorrow, it's worth more than a cost that's coming back 5 years from now. Does that make sense? Okay, to the time value of money. Right?
So that's similar to purchasing power.
Yeah. The opposite of purchasing power, but you're right. If you don't have that money for 10 years, you can't do anything with it, and you've got a promise to get it, so what would you pay? What would you pay me today for a promise I'll give you this back in 20
Yeah,
years?
but today for $20 you can buy a case of beer. 10 years from now you might only buy a bottle.
Exactly. So that's another part of that whole decision, right? Right? That makes sense. So the time value of money is an important factor. So when I'm doing payback period, it's not considered, is it? You don't hear them saying, gee, a payback period of 12 years. Well, I don't know, when she said it, the payback was 12 years, I don't know if that meant she was going to get $1 a year for 11 years, and on the 12th year she was going to get $999,000. Like, I don't know, when someone says the payback is 12 years, what does that mean? And if I was trying to compare between buying photovoltaic or buying something else, and you start thinking about it, the way that cash flow is coming is a very important part of the decision, right? A very critical part of that decision, because if you don't know that cash flow, one could have a better payback than the other, and you wouldn't even look at it, and it's obviously not the right one. So I think this is what we just went through, but $100 of today's money invested for a year, earning 5% interest, would be worth $105 a year from now. So that's the interest part of it. There's also the risk part that we talked about, which is, gee, Ron may not be here, right? Now, if I put this in my wall, it's likely going to be there 10 years from now, right? So we can be pretty confident there's no risk. If I put my light bulb in the ceiling, it's likely going to still be there 10 years from now. So there's very little risk, but there's still the inflation part, or the interest part of that decision that would say that saving 100 kilowatt hours 10 years from now isn't worth as much as saving 100 kilowatt hours today. Right? But we could put in, gee, I think energy is going to go up in price. Right? You could say energy is going to go up in price, and then you've got a different challenge. Okay, that makes sense? Any questions on that? Perfect. Okay, so here's two cash flows. So this one, we got 130, 117, 105, 95, it just goes downhill over time. So that's this one here, right? And then this one starts at 80, so it starts lower, but it goes up over time, and that's this one here, right? So this one's increasing, and this one's decreasing. Both are investment of $500, let's say, so let's take a look at these two investments. Which one would be the better investment? Well, we're not sure, so let's take a look. Let's do some analysis. So if we went on payback period, because this one gets more cash up front, investment one looks like a better investment. This one looks like a better investment because our payback is under 5 years. This one doesn't look like as good an investment because our payback is just about 5.5 years. So using the payback approach, you would pick this one, right? Make sense? Now when we're talking about an investment in something to save energy costs, and we know energy costs are going to increase, which one of these curves is likely closer matches energy savings? This one, right? It's going to go up over time. This one would show a decrease in energy, not likely going to happen. Yet the bias would be using payback to pick this one, because it looks better on a payback process, right? It's got a better payback. Yet over time we know it's going to save more. So you can see right away that the payback decision here biases us to the wrong decision. Okay? So let's look at net present value. So I said net present value was the NPV is the present value of the cash outflows versus the cash inflows. So I'm giving $500 today, so we know that's worth $500, right? We just said today's money's worth today, so here's my investment. The net present value of the cash inflows on investment one, so if I take all of these inflows over time, I said I was using a cost of capital of 4%, which would be my mortgage on my house for an investment in something like this. So this over time, the net present value is 800, or the present value of that cash flow is 877. You can do that with Excel or there's tables to do it. And we get a net present value of 377. We take this cash flow, which by the way we wouldn't have picked because of payback, but if we do it this way, we get this cash flow and look at how much it's worth. And it just makes sense, it's further out, but there's way more cash coming. So you see how a net present value decision would make a better decision than the payback in this case. And unfortunately, this is the typical payback for energy. So we've got to, we've got to stop using payback as our decision process when we're making decisions around energy savings, because they typically look like this. Okay. Do you understand? I know that's a lot of accounting gobbledygook in 5 minutes, but do you understand the basic premise of that? And you can use, if you use Excel or anything, you can do the net present value calculation pretty quick. The trick is what are the parameters that we're putting in. And that's what I'll take you through quickly as a quick exercise on this. So my friend Murray, and that is actually a picture of my friend Murray Brown, and that's in Nepal, where energy prices are very, very high. You may not realize this, but we climbed to the base camp of Everest about 5 years ago, and I could stay in a hotel for about $2 a night Canadian to stay in that hotel. had no electricity, and they just heated as long as there was enough